Send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that matter across the country. We have plenty coming up, including asking how has the slew of strikes affected you this week? The leader of the Train Drivers Union, I'm delighted to say, is sitting next to me live here in the studio. Plus, on the nurses' strike, we'll be talking to a nurse and a Tory MP who is also an NHS hospital doctor. Lots more besides that, but first let's bring you right up to date with all of the news today. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alastair. 1 minute past 12, here's the latest. NHS bosses are urging hospitals to free up beds ahead of planned industrial action by ambulance crews in England. They say it's vital that the government and unions talk urgently to resolve the pay dispute before the first day of action on the 21st of December. It comes after NHS data showed that 1 in 6 patients are now waiting more than an hour to be transferred from ambulance staff to A&E teams. Former Cabinet Minister Dr Liam Fox, who also worked as a GP, told us they need to overhaul how long patients remain in critical care.
And one of our problems is that we have so many people occupying acute beds in acute hospitals, which are very expensive, very intensive for staff, and they really don't need to be there. We need, in my view, to go back to our concept of convalescent hospitals. And I think that we need to ensure that people are getting the appropriate care, because if you've got people occupying those acute beds who don't need to be there, it doesn't matter how much money you pour into the system, you're not going to get the output that's appropriate for that.
Well, meanwhile, the Nurses' Union is warning that the Health Secretary's macho negotiating style is hindering efforts to resolve their pay dispute. RCN General Secretary Pat Cullen says Steve Barclay undervalues the work of nurses because it's a 90% female profession. She's urging the Prime Minister to step in before the dispute engulfs the NHS. The union has been asking for a 19% pay rise, but says they would consider any new offer. Meanwhile, a second walkout is planned for Tuesday. Commuters are facing more travel delays today as members of the RMT Rail Union continue their 48-hour strike. Trains are starting later than usual and finishing earlier, with some parts of the country having no service at all. Bus drivers in London are also continuing their 48-hour strike, adding to the travel disruption. Former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall told us there's currently no end in sight.
As we've seen all too regularly, whenever there are negotiations, especially with the rail unions, it never comes out in a good way. Whatever is offered by the government is sneered at as derisory and isn't going to hit the mark. So you do wonder, what is the number that Mick Lynch has in mind? What would he accept and what the country can afford? But it's quite clear that something needs to happen because the country is pretty much now ground to a halt.
More than a quarter of people expect to start the new year in debt. According to research by Tesco Bank, most believe it will take around 21 months to pay back what they owe. Those surveyed say they've borrowed money from family and friends and used overdrafts to cover energy bills and rent. GB News viewer Jess Barkley told us her family have had to work really hard to keep their finances in order.
With the year that we've had personally, we've had work issues, I've had health issues. At one point, the doctors wanted to sign me off work completely, and I was like, I can't do that. Now, moving forward, I want to make sure that my family is financially crisis-proof as much as it can be, and that we've got a really good buffer.
Police say a man and a woman arrested after two young boys were found dead in East London were known to the children. Emergency services were called to Cornwallis Road in Dagenham yesterday, where they discovered the boys aged 2 and 5. Both were already deceased. The man and woman were arrested separately in nearby locations and remain in custody. The Met Office has issued yellow weather warnings and is expecting ice for much of Scotland, the north and southwest and Wales today. It comes as blizzards are set to sweep across the north of the country this weekend. Temperatures could temporarily rise on Sunday. However, frost is expected to create difficult road conditions. Fine Gael leader Leo Varadkar is now Irish Taoiseach again. He's replacing Fianna Fáil leader Micheál Martin as part of the rotating Taoiseach agreement with Ireland's coalition government. Mr Varadkar previously held the office from 2017 to 2020. The committee investigating the January 6th Capitol riots is reportedly preparing to vote on 3 criminal charges against Donald Trump. If passed, they'll urge the US Justice Department to indict the former president with offences including insurrection. Discussions are also set to take place over what to do with Donald Trump's tax returns, which were finally obtained last month. And Harry and Meghan will be invited to the King's coronation in May next year, according to the Daily Telegraph newspaper. That's despite the pair making damaging claims levelled at the royal family in their Netflix documentary series. The newspaper says the guest list is yet to be decided, but all family members are welcome. You're watching GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get straight back to Alastair.
Ray, thank you very much indeed. As many have wryly observed these days, it's probably easier and quicker to ask who isn't on strike. For some, it's a real rarity. Others have something of a track record of industrial action. Now, the initial drive was common: pay rises to offset periods of stagnation and the worsening cost of living crisis. But as time moved along, it became clear that there were other profound concerns too right across the piece. Working conditions and job security in both the rail industry and the National Health Service. Safety is a grave concern. Well, today's newspapers are awash with news of strikes: rail, buses, highway workers, baggage handlers, driving examiners. The list literally goes on and on. And the Times leads, interestingly, with a single line here saying Sunak needs to get a grip. Well, as far as I can gather from some who are involved in these industrial bouts of strike action, they'd like him to stop getting involved and let people that they're negotiating with actually come up with a deal that might just bring peace back across the spectrum. But that's what the Times is saying there. Mr Sunak needs to get a grip after hospitals were told to discharge thousands of patients before next week's ambulance strike. The Mail and the Telegraph's front pages also refer to further upcoming industrial action. So today we're looking across the spectrum of strikes and asking if there are any glimmers of hope or exit strategies. We also want to look at the attitude of the government and employers, as well as the seemingly intriguing shift in public opinion. Support for health workers was initially very strong. Polling suggests that it's slightly less so now. And we'd genuinely love to hear from you directly. Opinion polls are one thing, but tweets and emails direct to us come from the soul, and we will share the very best with everybody else who's kind enough to be listening to us or watching in. So do get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk, tweet @gbnews or tweet me direct, or go on to Facebook. It was all over Ray's news bulletin just a moment, so let's start with the National Health Service, and I'm pleased to welcome back to the programme Dr Dan Poulter, Member of Parliament, former Health Minister and currently an NHS hospital doctor. You're in a unique position because you're a Tory MP, you're a former minister and you are an NHS doctor. Rather than supporting the industrial action, to say, come on, guys and gals, this is not what we joined for.
No, I think Alex, that's certainly right. I mean, I'm in principle wouldn't go on strike because I'd worried about the consequences that it would have on my patients, and I think certainly where I'm speaking to you from now in Suffolk, the ballot threshold wasn't met, and nurses in this part of the country are not going to be striking, and have probably taken a similar view to the one that I take. However, well, I think if we look at the basis of the dispute, I think nurses do have a point. And the point is that usually the government sets the pay recommendations based upon the independent pay review body. That pay review body reports back in around February of every year. So the current pay recommendations would have been made in February of this year. But they were unable to consider, in making those recommendations, the unprecedented situation we find with the war in the Ukraine, the impact that's had on inflation and the cost of living. And we've now got a very different situation. So in view of that, I think both sides are showing some intransigence in here, but I'd like to see a solution, some adult, grown-up conversation around a table and a better pay offer made to nurses so that we can get on with the job that we're all here for, which is to look after patients.
But if you were writing the article under that Times newspaper headline, Sunak needs to get a grip, what do you specifically think that he should do? I mean, Barclay is saying his door's open. He's attempted to have some talks, although the Royal College of Nursing say he just sits there, twiddles his fingers and says there's nothing I can do. What do you personally recommend the Prime Minister should do?
So if I was giving advice, I would look at perhaps what the Scottish Government's done here, which is recognise that we are in an unprecedented and changed situation since the pay review body recommendations were made, and I would look at having a genuine dialogue. I think it's difficult. I think the Health Secretary is saying, I'm happy to talk, but this is the offer. I'm happy to talk as long as you accept the offer. So that's not really necessarily an open or an offer of genuine talks, and I think it's unrealistic. Close to 20% demand that the nursing union is making as well. So, but I think in Scotland they've settled around 7 to 8%, somewhere in that sort of margin, which is much closer to the cost of living. And there's also been an attempt to protect lower paid workers in particular. And so we see that there is a route to avoiding industrial action, which has been taken elsewhere in the UK. And I would hope that perhaps, in England, we can look at that and say, well, actually, this is about patients. Let's get around the table, have a genuine grown-up conversation and sort this out, and recognise that nurses deserve a bit of a better offer than they're currently being awarded.
But that generosity in Scotland has meant two things specifically, that taxpayers in the rest of the United Kingdom will be chipping in yet more towards Scottish public spending. And now those who are working hard and earning well in Scotland learn that their tax rate is actually going up. Do you think taxes should be higher to settle these pay claims?
Well, that's one way of doing it. My view would be that there are two things we can look at here. Firstly, I think there are very easy efficiencies in the NHS, particularly in the way that we procure common goods and services, and there are some simple savings there that could be made very quickly if hospitals work together and use their bulk buying power and economies of scale to purchase goods. So we could look at internal efficiencies to fund this. But the second internal efficiency is the fact that the temporary staffing bill in the NHS has gone up from about just under 3 billion, I think, in 2015 to over 6 billion today. And that's because increasingly NHS staff, and in this case it will be nurses, think that they will be able to earn more money working either in the private sector for private healthcare providers or working for locum agencies and nursing banks. And that, of course, ends up costing the NHS more money. So if we can improve the recruitment and retention of our workforce, which we know there are lots of nursing vacancies already, that will actually in itself deliver savings. So a bit of extra money towards the permanent workforce reduces that what is increasingly eye-watering temporary staffing bill of £6 billion a year for the NHS. So that's just good healthcare.
And as Chris Hopkins, who used to run NHS providers and is now the strategy boss at the NHS, said, that's absolutely the crucial, vital area. Oliver Dowden gives a very interesting interview to The Telegraph today, which their news hands have picked out the headline from: "Ambulance strikes will put the public at risk." Statement of the blindingly obvious, or an important wake-up call from the former chairman of your party?
No, I think that's a reasonable point. I think in particular, of all of the industrial action in the NHS, and let's be frank, this is unprecedented to see this scale of industrial action around the NHS, then the ambulance service action will be the one that will have the most significant impact on patient care and the ability to respond to emergency and life-threatening situations. And I think we've got to be frank about that, and recognise that the government will put in place mitigation measures. For example, I'm sure the army will be used to take over in some cases. Again, in the part of England I'm talking to you from, we won't see the emergency services, the ambulance services going on strike, but in much of the country they will be, and that is going to be a real challenge. So I think that makes the point all the more about why we need to have a grown-up discussion here between unions and government. Let's get to a better place that actually recognises that the pay review body recommendations are out of date, don't reflect the reality that we've seen since rampant inflation, and support our frontline workers, but at the same time get on with the job that we're all here to do, which is looking after patients. And there's a huge COVID backlog, let's not forget, as well, to deal with.
Ever calm and thoughtful and helpful. Dan, thank you so much for coming back and talking to us here on GB News. It's always a pleasure to have you on board. That's Dr. Dan Poulter, MP, both the DR bit at the beginning and the MP bit at the end. Very, very important. Dan's the MP for Conservatives Central Suffolk and North Ipswich, and as I said, is a former health minister himself. Well, joining me now, I'm pleased to say, is a new friend, Professor Roger Seifert, who's Professor of Industrial Relations at Wolverhampton University. I've written a whole lot of questions I want to put to you, but I'm going to take one thing right out of the middle of what Dan just said in what I thought was a genuinely fascinating interview, where he pointed out that the pay review boards was supposed to be one of those clever tools that stopped these issues coming to strikes. It was supposed to take the heat out of the situation. What's gone wrong with the pay review boards?
Well, as you say, they were actually all set up, certainly for the nurses, teachers, and more recently police and prison officers, after industrial action, so they were supposed to make it easier. But the real issue with all pay-setting mechanisms is when there's low inflation, then they're quite straightforward. But as soon as inflation surges, then they are in difficulty because they get out of date very quickly. And the evidence presented also is no longer relevant. And in the case of the pay review body for nurses, as well as other health workers, the government has 3 bites of the cherry. I mean, it more or less decides who sits on it, tells them how much they can afford, and can always ignore it. And in fact, this government has previously ignored it. And I think one thing we will want to know is if the pay review body in February recommends 8% for next year, will the government then endorse that as well? It seems unlikely. So they were never really designed to deal with a crisis situation.
Before becoming an academic, you were a management consultant and talked to top men and women at the top tables right across the spectrum. One of the common complaints, whether it's in the rail dispute or within the NHS, is an incapacity of management to manage, whether it's Network Rail, the train operating companies, the NHS itself, which has got a new chief executive. Does the government need to get its tank off all of their lawns and let management just get on with managing these disputes?
Not at all. I mean, managers always complain that their right to manage is somehow watered down or some way impaired, but it's not the case. In fact, there is an argument for the opposite, that in the railway industry and certainly in health and education, the civil service, that managers are increasingly unaccountable to anybody. They're not accountable upwards to ministers particularly, and they're not accountable downward to their workforce. As a result, they do make a lot of mistakes. And one of the features, of course, the last 5-6 years is that their own pay has gone up enormously. I'd like you to interview some senior health executives and ask them how much their pay's gone up, and equally in the rail industry. Some of them are paying themselves very large sums. They're not somehow saying that they can't do with a pay cut this year, as they're asking their members to do. So really, I don't think that's the case. The case is the government pulls the string in the public sector, and to some extent in the railways, the government is deeply embedded and involved. And at the moment, it's quite unclear what the government wants to do. So sometimes they say, let's all get around the table and negotiate. Then they say we're not negotiating. Then they say we have enough money. Then they say we don't have enough money. Then they say it's inflationary. Then they say somehow, for example, bankers' bonuses are allowed to rip through the ceiling, and that's not inflationary. So the government is inconsistent in its approach, in its method, and in its theorising about the nature of the economy. And as a consequence, I think the managers, as well as the unions, are left a bit in limbo as to what to do next. But the government has got to be involved. It is involved, and it has to be absolutely clear the nature of its involvement. It can't just sit on its hands and say there's no more money, because there is more money, as you've just heard. It can't just say it's inflationary, because it's not always inflationary. And they can't say it's nothing to do with them, because they are deeply embedded in all these disputes, and they've got to show leadership. I was brought up to learnt that governments are there to govern the country. And at the moment, I can't see that happening.
Roger Seaford, a pleasure to meet you and a joy to talk to you. I hope you'll bless us with your time again here on GB News. Thank you very much indeed. That's Professor Roger Seaford, Professor of Industrial Relations at Wolverhampton Union. Well, as I said right at the top of the programme, sitting next to me and listening to lots of that, because I was watching his body language, is Mick Whelan, who is the General Secretary of the Train Drivers Union. That was really interesting last point from Seaford, I thought, about management, because in fact, when the Times says Sunak needs to get a grip, I suspect that what you would say is, don't get a grip, get your tank off our lawns and let us negotiate eyeball to eyeball with Network Rail and the train operating companies.
I think you've nailed it. I think Roger's nailed it as well. Some of this is ideological. I think some people are seeing an opportunity in a post-pandemic world to put their view of what industry should do and how they should do it. I find myself in a rather awkward position that I work, or most of my members work in private companies. They work for First Group, they work for Abellio, they work for Trentalia, where they are declaring profits, they are paying dividends to shareholders, yet the people who work for them haven't had a pay rise for 3 years.
Yeah.
Surely you think about paying your workers first before declaring a dividend or a profit?
Yeah. It's been a remarkable, as you well know, because we first met. I was an industrial correspondent for years and years at ITN. The unity between the rail unions, and there's your own, and then there's obviously RMT, which used to be, the RMT and the TSSA. It strikes me, reading the papers and listening to interviews with other colleagues, that that's just a little fractured at the moment. RMT saying to you guys, please don't accept this deal. We don't want it. You guys would get over 80,000 a year if you accepted it. Let's hold together on this in rejecting it.
Well, quite simply, I mean, if you actually look what happened the other weekend, the RMT acted in good faith. They suspended all their action to have 2 weeks of intensive talks. They came to a deal. As I understand it, up to the level of Secretary of State had endorsed the deal. And then somebody interfered. And the RMT were left with no opportunity but to put strikes back on. But what happened then was rather odd in industrial relations. Someone inserted 2 clauses that were going to be deliberately create that rift about DOO. Now, we are not going to support driver-only operation on trains. There's no place in the industry for it at this moment in time, and they're not ready for it. That was done deliberately to derail the deal. So somebody in government, higher than the Secretary of State for Transport, decided that they wanted these strikes to go ahead. They wanted then to ramp it up in all the other trade unions at the same time. This is government interference of the worst kind.
So he's getting a grip and he's actually blocking progress.
I don't know if it's Mr Sunak himself, I don't know if it's Mr Shapps in business, but somebody is.
Yeah, because it used to be Shapps for Harper, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Let me put this to you as a general observation. It seems to me that a rail industry that is modernised and fit for purpose, fit for the 22nd century, and employs skilled and well-paid workers is the only way forward. Otherwise, your industry and the industry that all of your colleagues rely upon for employment at whatever level is simply going to be a dinosaur that is a burden on the taxpayer whose love and affection at the moment you've lost.
Well, I understand that. I mean, before the pandemic, we were talking about transport poverty. We were talking about people who paid a third of their income because they couldn't live anywhere near where they worked, having to do that to come to work. I want to get back to talking about green issues. I want to talk about electrification. I want to talk about... I can't see how we deliver Kyoto, Paris, or even the 1 degree without putting this small island of 60 million people, right, with infrastructure and integrated transport at its heart. But we're not. And, you know, this isn't just about this year. Rail workers haven't had a pay rise for 3 years. So how many years would we be expected to forego a pay rise before someone would deem it's acceptable?
Yeah.
And if people want to play the politics of envy and talk about the rates of pay for train drivers, I'm happy to defend that as well.
We have a People's poll out today, which I'll be discussing with one of my favourite pollsters a little bit later on. Absolute standout number here for me, and I think for you, because I want to ask you how important public opinion is. I threw that out in front of you about they don't love you anymore. But our poll suggests that 29% oppose the strikes and that 20-odd% blame you, and about the same number blame the government.
Well, let's look at that then, because maybe we're not getting our message across. We came through the pandemic, and during the pandemic period of time, we didn't seek a pay rise. Then the cost of living crisis hit. It went to 5.2%, then it went to 8.2%, and now it's running at 13 to 14, depending on what figures you use. And then when we first went on strike, we were running at 49 to 64% approval ratings, something I've never experienced in the rail industry in all my time as an industrial representative. And that was because of all the other sectors and everybody feeling it, from the nurses to the fire brigades, the barristers, the police of Scotland, the teachers, the lecturers, the numerous strikes that are out there. So this isn't just something that affects the rail industry. But what we didn't know at that point in time was that our employers had done a rather immoral and corrupt deal with the government that they couldn't offer more than 2%. Now, they've offered us nothing, by the way. So when people say solve this with the industry, we were going to the industry and they said, we can't make you an offer. You have to talk to the government. When we went in good faith to the government, they said, no, you've got to talk to your employers. So after months and months and months of being caught in catch-22, we asked our members, what do you want us to do? And then we got mandates from 94 to 99.9%. Now, that was over 6 or 7 months ago. We've just refreshed all those mandates in 13 companies, and our mandates got up by 1% on average. So the strength of feeling is still there.
We'll add that to our People's poll there. Mick Whelan, a pleasure to see you again after all these years. Thank you very much indeed, Mick Whelan, the General Secretary of ASLEF, Association of, I can't remember, Boilermakers, fireworkers and all that. Train drivers union, anyway, they are being very honest and very open about the loss of love that you used to have for the rail industry and wanting the government to stop pricking progress. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio and online, with lots more coming up on today's programme, including online searches for food banks have surged by over 250% this year. I'll be speaking to our reporter who's been meeting with food bank volunteers. But first, let's bring you up to date with the all-important weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK will be cold with a mixture of sunny spells and patchy rain or snow. Here are the details. Eastern Scotland will remain largely dry, but wintry showers will push into northern and western regions. They'll fall as snow over higher ground, and a brisk breeze will develop across the Northern Islands. Northern Ireland will escape most of the showers, but some drizzle is possible under the cloudy skies. A few sunnier spells in the northwest. It'll also be a generally cloudy day across parts of northern England as patchy rain and sleet pushes south, again falling as snow over the Pennines. This band of cloud Rain, sleet and hill snow will extend into northern and central Wales. Meanwhile, further showers will also drift into Pembrokeshire and the southwest, leading to a largely grey afternoon. There'll be an increasing chance of sunnier spells in the Midlands, particularly southeastern parts. Temperatures will be up slightly, but it'll still be a cold day for many at around 5 Celsius. The brightest skies will be across southeast England, where it will also stay dry throughout the afternoon. However, there will be a slight breeze, particularly along Norfolk and Southwark coastlines. Southern England will also have a dry afternoon. Coastal areas here will see some of the highest temperatures of the day, pushing towards 8 or 9 Celsius. Looking into the evening, and showers will remain, whilst temperatures will quickly drop away for those with clear skies. That's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
It's 12:32. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. NHS bosses are urging hospitals to free up beds ahead of planned industrial action by ambulance crews in England. They say it's vital that the government and unions talk urgently to resolve the pay dispute before the first day of action on the 21st of December. It comes after NHS data showed that 1 in 6 patients are now waiting more than an hour to be transferred from ambulances to A&E. The Nurses Union is warning that the Health Secretary's macho negotiating style is hindering efforts to resolve their pay dispute. RCN General Secretary Pat Cullen says Steve Barclay undervalues the work of nurses because it's a 90% female profession. She's urging the PM to step in before the dispute engulfs the NHS. More than a quarter of people expect to start the new year in debt. According to research by Tesco Bank, most believe it will take around 21 months to pay back what they owe. Those surveyed say they've borrowed money from family and friends and used overdrafts to cover energy bills and rent. The Met Office has issued yellow weather warnings and is expecting ice for much of Scotland, the northwest, the southwest and Wales. It comes as blizzards are set to sweep across the north of the country. Temperatures could temporarily rise on Sunday. However, frost is expected to create difficult road conditions. And the Duke and Duchess of Sussex will be invited to the King's coronation in May next year, according to the Daily Telegraph newspaper. That's despite Harry and Meghan making damaging claims levelled at the royal family in their Netflix documentary. The newspaper says the guest list is yet to be decided, but all family members are welcome. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Let's go straight back to Alastair Stewart.
Ray, thanks very much indeed. Christmas is just over a week away, with many wondering how they're going to afford to eat over the holiday period. As the nation continues to grapple with the rising cost of living, more people than ever are relying on food banks to get through the winter months, including full-time staff and even nurses. Now, some say that food banks are an indictment of the fifth richest country in the world. Others, and they include me, say that actually they suggest that it is an evidence of goodwill out there between people who perhaps are a little better off than others, trying to help those who are literally down on their uppers. Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper is in Gately, in Stockport, at a local food bank. Sophie, you've been meeting with patrons, the ones I've just sung the praises of, and volunteers doing such a sterling job there today. Tell us what you found out.
Absolutely, Alastair. Well, this food bank here in Stockport, like so many around the rest of the UK, absolutely relies on the donations of people who are generous in the local community. Now, today, they've had a huge influx of donations that you can see here around me. Now, given that it's Christmas just over a week away, these donations are absolutely imperative. They'll be bagged up here and they'll be taken to families and households who really need them at this time of year. A little bit earlier, I spoke to a couple of people who rely on this food bank.
You know, coming up to Christmas is quite a difficult time for a lot of people. And, well, I've lost someone recently, you know, a friend of mine, and it's, been like a setback for me as well, sorting, the funeral out, which is next week. I tend to try and help others as much as I can, but like I'm struggling, coming up to Christmas time, and I'm worried over the electric, gas, because I'm terrified, what the bills are going to be. Well, it's been a bit of a nightmare for me recently, as well.
I've been using the food bank for about a year now. I was made redundant, so it's kind of been a bit of a real big help for me, really. Benefits are not very helpful, to be honest. I've got my daughter at home with me, who's 20, and she's had a baby, and so she's on maternity leave. So we've got help in the sense of her maternity leave, but other than that, we've not really got much help otherwise. So the food bank's been a massive help.
Well, joining me now is one of the volunteers here at Gatley Food Bank, Jamaica. Lovely to be joined by you today. Tell me a little bit about what goes on here at the food bank.
So every week we change, like the sauce, the protein, the carbohydrate. So for example, if we put rice this week, next week we're gonna put pasta. And if this week we have put tin fruit, next week we're gonna put rice pudding. So every week we make sure that we are changing, and then the families, they have opportunity to have something different in their table.
And tell me, do you think in the last year or so there's been an increase in the number of people coming to this food bank?
I would say after the war in Ukraine and the rise of the gas price and everything getting more expensive, we are definitely seeing the people coming more often, and also the number of people coming increasing. Yeah.
Do you think at Christmas it's important that we are able to support people in our local communities?
Absolutely, because Christmas is a time that we are all around the table, and I believe people always should have memories that the table are very, very full of food and they have everything. So we are making sure as well that on Christmas we are giving them more than we usually give. So we put toys for the kids sometimes, we put chocolates, mince pie, so we are making sure as well that people are having more, because Christmas is a time to celebrate.
Thank you so much for your time today. You can see here some of the bags that have been pre-prepared that will now go out to families who most need them this Christmas.
Sophie Reaper reporting there. Brilliant, Sophie. Thank you very much indeed. And through you, huge thanks to the volunteers and the patrons and also the users who gave their time up to discuss with you however you want to describe it, is a tricky situation made slightly easier by really good and very generous people. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come this afternoon, including the safety of women was highlighted once again this week following the sentencing of Zara Alenas' killer Jordan McSweeney. We'll be discussing that and what needs to be done once again to mitigate such crimes and to try and understand where some of the root causes really are. We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview channel 236.
And YouView channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It is a little past 1 o'clock and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio and online. And you've been getting in touch on our big topic of the day, the strike action. Yasmin says, on Thursday going to work took me 3 hours. Euston to Watford train was delayed over an hour. Not only that, but they kept us on the train without opening the doors. I was in tears, standing in -5 degrees. This is simply not acceptable. Enough is enough. Angie says, I worked as a nurse for 46 years, never had appropriate pay or staffing, but it would never have considered striking. I would never have considered striking. Lisa says, as a district nurse, I would like to point out that the NHS, not just about hospitals, it's all very well, the government telling hospitals to free up space out and help community services, but they are already overwhelmed. We were the forgotten service during the pandemic and things have continued to decline. So there's just a taste of it. Keep those brilliant thoughts coming in. We want to hear your side of the argument right across the spectrum, and we will share the best as the programme continues up towards 2 o'clock. We are GB News at you send your views to gbviews@gbnews.uk or do it via Twitter or Facebook. Now, the discussion around women's safety came to the fore again this week when Joe Lumley suggested that modern women needed to get tough against wolf whistling and casual sexism. In an interview with the Prospect magazine, Joe said, the new fashion is to be a victim. It's pathetic. We have gone mad. Well, her comments drew immediate criticism, particularly in the wake of the sentencing of Zara Alina's killer, who attacked the 35-year-old when she was walking home. In the Times, Charlie Gawang Edrington wrote, what the actress's mindset wouldn't have said, but the actress's mindset wouldn't have saved Zara Alina, Sabina Nisa or Sarah Everard. So is Joanna Lumley right? And what needs to be done in order, finally, to secure women's safety? Joining me live in the studio, I'm delighted to say, is Patsy Stevenson, who is a women's rights activist, writer and public speaker. There's a big difference, is there not, between casual sexism and what you both fear is that obvious and unstoppable progression towards things that are much, much worse, which you yourself witnessed and your face all over the newspapers at that remembrance service. Is that an exaggeration to fear that progression, or is that reality?
It is reality, unfortunately. We wish it wasn't reality, but that is what happens. A lot of people seem to ignore sexism when it seems smaller or seems like Joanna Lumley said, you could just smack their hand away or give them the telling off. Unfortunately, that sexism, as casual as it may seem, does progress onto abuse, basically, and objectification of women, which leads to rape and murder of women.
But can you understand, or do you simply dismiss out of hand comments from people like Joe Lumley and people of her generation who say, you know, we've had several tweets on it saying, you know, when I was a worker in my early teens, my early 20s, that's how guys were. And we, you know, we had to get on with life, and we did, and just dismiss it out of hand and occasionally use very fruity language to tell them exactly what they could do with their hands.
Yeah, well, I mean, guys are still like that. So it's not just back in the day, this is how guys were. It still is like that for us. The difference is that I understand Joanna Lumley's comments and I sympathise with her because she was from a certain generation where I believe that it was very brainwashed into women that they had to be internalised misogynists, otherwise they would fail at every hurdle they came across. Now we have this openness and a lot of people are talking about the experiences they have, especially with the internet and social media. So now we can try and fix the issues.
Which are perfect point at which to bring in my second guest, who you can see there is also live in the studio with me and with Patsy, and that's Anissa Kissoon, who's the founder of Creative Change, which is a drama initiative which works with children and young people to try and bring about that very change that Patsy's talking about. Really good schools and really good heads and really good teachers take that agenda as read. You've got to educate young women how to look after themselves and be sensible, particularly in the era of social media, but you've also got to tell lads about respect and about rights and about privacy.
Definitely. I think the problem with the schools is that they have so much on, don't they? They have so much to tackle and deal with. So we have to do it. We have to take it upon ourselves as a community to try to educate them from a very young age, to toughen them up.
When the team were discussing this, and we all agreed we really wanted to do it with both of you, one of them was talking about experiences at a co-educational school, and quite a few of the boys turn up having been at single-sex schools, maybe prep schools or whatever it might be, it doesn't matter, and suddenly that's the first experience they've actually got of near-adult women. That can be a tricky period.
Yeah, I mean, I think I understand that, but at the same time, if you go to an all-boys school, for example, it should be down to the teachers and parents alike to teach these boys what misogyny is, what is sexual harassment, what is not okay to say and do, so that then when they meet these women for the first time, possibly, then they know how to behave like a normal, respectful human being.
Let me ask a brutal question, ask both of you a brutal question, which I know will offend some people who will hear me when I say it. Are some parents a problem? So proud of their strapping young lad, you know, boys will be boys, oh, he's just being a lad. You need to read the Riot Act to parents as well, and that's not always easy, even for a head teacher.
No, definitely, and I think also it's cultural as well. So we've got to be able to tackle culture. We have to be able to openly talk about these things so that we can actually understand each other a lot more.
Patsy, do you think that where it also really matters in the judiciary and in the police, which was one of your big complaints at the time of that tragic death, has there been any progress since, Sarah Everson?
I mean, with the police, for example, there is misogyny within the police. We had a report recently that came out to explore the actual race, misogyny in the police. I'm saying racism because I hope there's one about racism as well soon. But I think, I mean, I'm going through legal proceedings at the moment with the Met because of what happened at that vigil. But I know of tons of stories where women have been abused by police, whether it be their partner who is in the police, and then they'll report something and it won't be taken seriously because they're their friends, and things just don't get taken seriously or reported. Even when there's domestic violence or abuse from someone who isn't partnered with a police officer, if you go to the police about this stuff, sometimes they do say, well, it's just not enough. Oh, they did what? It's not. And the problem is with this is Zara Alina, that guy should have been in prison at the time. Yes. And even two of his exes came forward and said, he has harassed us, he's given us death threats. Yeah. Why was he not in prison? You know, that shouldn't have been allowed to happen. The
sentencing of Sarah Everson's killer was Sarah Everard, sorry, I've said that twice now, my mistake, was very, very stark and very, very strong. The talk is of possibly short, sharp sentences, even for wolf whistling. I mean, that struck me when I read it as being almost demeaning.
I think, I mean, with wolf whistling, I think what's happened is they need to understand, and police need to understand, what counts as misogyny, what counts as sexual harassment, and then, in turn, men need to understand that this should have a consequence for them. I don't know about, you know, if you wolf whistle, how are you going to prove that someone wolf whistled at you? There's a bit of discrepancy around that sort of thing, but making misogyny a hate crime, that I think is probably a good idea.
How important is that part of the enlightenment and the education to warn, not only that it's wrong, but there are sanctions available, and in extremis they can be quite brutal sanctions.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that you've said here today. I think we need to just tackle this on a grassroots level and start off with the children. Prevention is definitely the key. And to, like I said earlier, let people understand the differences between cultures, the differences between our sexes as well, you know, but we have to have that protection as women. There is far too much out there, you know.
Do either of you ever come across what must be one of the most tricky things, if it does exist, and that is young women shrugging their shoulders and saying, that's all part of life's rich experience, I can deal with it?
I've
never experienced a younger woman saying it. I think as you get older, maybe I'm speaking just as a 30-year-old, I don't know from personal experience, but I think I've spoken to a lot of older women who have said through their experience they kind of develop a harder shell and sort of ways to just deal with it, because there wasn't a way out for them. There wasn't a place they could go. There wasn't a safe place they could talk about it.
I think we're all agreed that profoundly we want to change an attitude, particularly amongst young men as they turn into young adults. And that the police force to keep focused upon this. But it's a dreadful question to ask, but I do need to ask both of you. Is there anything else that the government needs to do in terms of primary legislation, or is the primary legislation where you want it to be, Patsy?
It's definitely not where I want it to be. I mean, I remember talking about this in 2021, of March 2021, where I was saying we need more legislation, we need something to happen for the safety of women and girls, and it's nearly 2 years on, nothing's happened. We've got things like the online safety bill, but unfortunately things like that actually include things where they're going to they're allowed to look at WhatsApp group chats of journalists and things like that, and it's not okay. You've also got things like the
Can I
public
just have
order
the last
bill.
word from Anissa on that as well? Legislation?
Needs change. Definitely needs change.
Brilliant. Really great to meet both of you, meet you again, and meet you for the first time. And thank you for what you do. And thanks for coming into GB News to share those profound reflections upon it. Not an easy subject, I know, but thanks also for what you do. Thank you both very much indeed. Now, a candlelit vigil is being held later on today in memory of the 4 boys who died after falling into that frozen lake in Solihull last week. The boys, aged 6, 8, 10 and 11, died after falling through the ice. Our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, is in Solihull this morning. Jack, how devastating is that still for this community, and what's planned for later?
Well, Alastair, this is, I don't think this community has had to go through something like this ever before. It was utterly devastating. Of course, the incident alone on Monday, when we heard the news of the deaths of 8-year-old Finlay Butler, 11-year-old Thomas Stewart, and of course 10-year-old Jack Johnson. And then on Thursday, when we received the news that 6-year-old Sam Butler, the brother of Finlay, had passed away. For this community, it almost felt like they had to go through the whole grieving process again, and many people bringing back more flowers, bringing back more balloons. If I just step aside, you can just see there the balloons and people paying their respects. There's a lot of people here, but it's quiet. It's quiet as well. But conversations as well as remembrance are turning towards the future and how to stop tragedies like this happening again. When the West Midlands Ambulance Service were here, I spoke to James Williams, who's the head of emergency planning, about the safety of open water.
Unfortunately, the temptation in these scenarios to be on the ice or in open water, and whether that's in the cold through ice or in the summer when it's really hot, the dangers are immense, and those media messages are going out all the time, supported by the fire service, and our view is please just be very careful, and in these stages don't enter onto any ice, because you can see what tragedies can come from it.
Well, as well as coming together tonight, a Just Giving page has been set up for what are now being called the Babs Mill Princes. £63,000 has already been raised for that. But tonight, side by side and hand in hand, members of this community will come together once again for that candlelit vigil to remember those 4 boys.
Jack, thanks very much indeed, and no doubtly we'll be hearing from you again later here on GB News TV and Radio. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with more to come. But first, a quick break.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hello and welcome if you've just joined us. Hello and thank you if you've been with us since midday. I'm Alastair Stewart and we are into the second and final hour of our programme, keeping you company here on TV and radio with plenty more still to come, including more on our top discussion, the continuing strikes. Do you have sympathy for those who are on strike? How has the action affected you? We'll be hearing your thoughts later on in the programme. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news. Here once again is Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alastair. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. Let's get the latest. NHS bosses are urging hospitals to free up beds ahead of planned industrial action by ambulance crews in England. They say it's vital the government and unions talk urgently to resolve the pay dispute before the first day of action on the 21st of December. It comes after NHS data showed that 1 in 6 patients are now waiting more than an hour to be transferred from ambulance staff to A&E teams. Former Cabinet Minister Dr Liam Fox, who also worked as a GP, told GB News they need to overhaul how long patients remain in critical care.
And one of our problems is that we have so many people occupying acute beds in acute hospitals, which are very expensive, very intensive for staff, and they really don't need to be there. We need, in my view, to go back to our concept of convalescent hospitals. And I think that we need to ensure that people are getting the appropriate care, because if you've got people occupying those acute beds who don't need to be there, it doesn't matter how much money you pour into the system, you're not going to get the output that's appropriate for that.
Well, the Nurses' Union is warning that the Health Secretary's macho negotiating style is hindering efforts to resolve their pay dispute. RCN General Secretary Pat Cullen says Steve Barclay undervalues the work of nurses because it's a 90% female profession. She's urging the Prime Minister to step in before the dispute engulfs the NHS. The union has been asking for a 19% pay rise, but says they would consider any new offer. Meanwhile, a second walkout is planned for Tuesday. Commuters are facing more travel delays today as members of the RMT Rail Union continue their 48-hour strike. Trains are starting later than usual and finishing earlier, with some parts of the country having no service at all. Bus drivers in London are also continuing their 48-hour strike, adding to the disruption. Former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall told GB News there's no end in sight.
As we've seen all too regularly, whenever there are negotiations, especially with the rail unions, it never comes out in a good way. Whatever is offered by the government is sneered at as derisory and isn't going to hit the mark. So you do wonder, what is the number that Mick Lynch has in mind? What would he accept and what the country can afford? But it's quite clear that something needs to happen because the country is pretty much now ground to a halt.
More than a quarter of people expect to start the new year in debt. According to research by Tesco Bank, most believe it will take around 21 months to pay back what they owe. Those surveyed say they've borrowed money from family and friends and used overdrafts to cover energy bills and rent costs. Police say a man and a woman arrested after two young boys were found dead in East London were known to the children. Emergency services were called to Cornwallis Road in Dagenham yesterday, where they discovered the boys aged 2 and 5. Both were already deceased. The man and woman were arrested separately in nearby locations and remain in custody. The Met Office has issued yellow weather warnings and is expecting ice for much of Scotland, the northwest and the southwest, and Wales today. It comes as blizzards are set to sweep across the north of the country this weekend. Temperatures could temporarily rise on Sunday. However, frost is expected to create difficult road conditions. Fine Gael leader Leo Varadkar is now Irish Taoiseach again. He's replacing Fianna Fáil leader Micheál Martin as part of the rotating Taoiseach agreement within Ireland's coalition government. Mr Varadkar previously held the office from 2017 to 2020. The committee investigating the January 6th Capitol riots is reportedly preparing to vote on 3 criminal charges against Donald Trump. If passed, they'll urge the US Justice Department to indict the former president with offences including insurrection. Discussions are also set to take place over what to do with Donald Trump's tax returns, which were eventually obtained last month. Harry and Meghan will be invited to the King's coronation in May next year, according to the Daily Telegraph. That's despite the pair making damaging claims levelled at the royal family in their Netflix documentary series. The newspaper says the guest list is yet to be decided, but all family members are welcome. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get straight back to Alastair.
Ray, thank you. Thanks very much indeed. Time now to return to our top story strikes, and I want to find out how the industrial action is affecting you at home. So please do send in your thoughts. However, strike action isn't just affecting individuals. Small businesses who we love to talk about on this programme, especially in the hospitality and entertainment industries, have had really quite a blow in what should have been one of their busiest months. They are at the sharp end of much of this, and it's not just rail, but post as well, of course. So we'll be talking to businesses that feel that they have been given short shrift in all of this. Delighted to be joined now by Jen Fuller, who's the founder of Etaloves, which produces baby products and has had many customers complain about delivery delays due to Royal Mail strikes. So I was also wondering when I knew we were going to be talking whether train deliveries of stuff that you need, materials and shifting product around the country, whether that's impacted as well. But it's mainly the postal service to get the goodies out.
Exactly that. Hi, Alastair. Thanks for having me. Yes, it's very much the postal service for us. It's actually, it's all very well getting a customer, all the hard work we do as a small business to actually gain a customer, get them to make a purchase. But if we can't fulfill that purchase by getting the product into their hands, it's obviously a hugely disappointing experience for us as a small business, but also for our customers. And it really has impacted us quite negatively over the last few months.
We have a poll coming up which shows there's quite sharply divided opinion as to whether the majority of the public blame the unions or blame the government. Are any of your customers blaming you, or do they understand that you have to try and do your very best? You can't do anything about deliveries or supplies coming in, but are they beginning to blame you and get grumpy and get disconsolate?
We're certainly getting some grumpy customers. I think everyone knows the postal strikes are impacting our ability and all businesses' ability to deliver. However, we are baby products, so it's quite an emotional purchase, and we might be now missing not only Christmas deliveries, but babies being born, baby showers, etc. So we are certainly seeing an increase. And I think for us, the challenge is the Black Friday sales. They're the things that seem to be stuck in the system. Actually, we've been able to, in the last couple of weeks, more effectively communicate to people, upgrade your service. We've been doing some free upgrades to full tracking so that we can have the right conversations and show that we've posted it, show that it's moving through the system. But it's things from actually a good few weeks ago that are still not turning up. And that's where you get the customers starting to go, well, have you posted it? Where is it? I'm getting things from other small businesses, and they start to have those sorts of conversations. But in the most part, everyone's very loyal and very understanding, but it certainly is taking up a lot more time for customer service.
In your view, would you risk finding extra money, as one or two of my guests have already said, not least for the nurses? Dr. Dan Poulter, who's a Tory MP as well, seem to be going down that road, because the Prime Minister and the Chancellor say that's only going to push inflation up and put costs up, which you already have to wrestle with as a business person.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I'm really just trying to manage the margins in my business with the customer service that I need to deliver. Ultimately, I need to find a way now and going forward, depending what happens, obviously, with the Royal Mail and the union and the strikes, I need to find a way to balance the value and the actual something that works and something that actually delivers to customers with the cost of that. So it's incredibly hard. I may have to put our postal costs up in order for us to offer a more effective and a more efficient courier service going forward. But it's something I'm watching day by day and making those choices live.
Two sides to that coin, fascinatingly. The Communication Workers Union have been told very clearly by their employers that by pushing for higher prices and going on strike, they risk putting their own business out of business. Do you have fears for the durability and health of your own business?
We're fortunate enough to have a lot of loyal repeat customers, and we're doing something very unique. So I don't have fears because of this particular strike. It's just another thing, another pressure that's being added to small businesses like mine, alongside obviously the cost of living crisis. We are seeing people spend a little bit less, and we're certainly expecting going into the new year to see a lot more caution in spending, particularly for things that are deemed more of a luxury purchase. So I'm nervous, but I'm optimistic is probably the best way to put it. But I'm unfortunately seeing lots of small business friends who are really struggling and are wrestling with that decision whether to cut their losses and close down, which is such a shame.
Jen, have you actively explored alternative methods of getting your product out to customers?
Yes, we absolutely have. As soon as we knew the strikes were coming, we looked at all the other couriers. Most of them are a lot more expensive, but what we've actually seen is we're putting out very clear communication of what the likely timelines are on the different courier options and letting customers choose between the cost and how quickly they need that delivery or how efficiently they need that delivery. But it is certainly it's a really tricky one. But we've had to sort of pivot and make sure we offer those options and let customers choose the risk level and the cost that they're happy to take.
Jem Fuller, great to meet you. I said at the very top, we always love to talk to small business people, people who set up their own business, backbone of the country. We wish you well and hope you thrive, and all of the people in your team. Thank you for breaking into your weekend to talk to us. That's Jem Fuller there, the founder of Etta Loves Sensory Baby Products, and giving us a good excuse to put some lovely pictures up of little babies there as well, which I hope very much indeed you enjoyed. I'm delighted to be joined now by another business owner. That's Sammy Ellard King, who is the marketing director of Amazing Grace live music venue in London, which lost 2 big bookings just this week due to the rail strikes. I mean, to use the very simple parlance, presumably bums on seats. If you don't have them, if they can't get to you, it can't happen.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Alastair. It's been a crazy week for us. I mean, we're situated right by London Bridge Station, which is the 4th busiest station in Europe, and it's been like a ghost town this week. It's crazy. It's almost like COVID levels again, of footfall past the venue, and we've lost 2 big corporate hires this week, which has massively impacted what was set to be a record week for the business. So yeah, really unfortunate.
Throughout the times, whether it was the COVID lockdown or whether it's been as a result of these strikes, we've always tried to talk to the hospitality and entertainment industries, because we know very well how important they are in terms of wealth creation, but also employment. How fearful are you that your venues won't survive and that the people that you employ might have to be looking for something else to do next year?
It's a great point, Alastair. We one of the things is, yes, of course, it impacts us as a business, but we have responsibility to our staff as well. There's over 30 people in our teams that have been impacted this week. Lost hours, that's bands, DJs, kitchen staff, waiters, bar staff, you name it. It is literally everybody. And these guys are on 0-hour contracts. They're not on salaries. So if they don't work, they don't get paid. And equally as well, this time of year, it's Christmas tip season. They get great tips. And if they don't have this, cost of living going up for them right now, right before Christmas, the timing of these strikes couldn't have been worse for our staff. And hopefully we can offer them more hours in the new year if people can get out and get back into bars after the Christmas season.
Are disappointed customers blaming you, or are they blaming the rail unions or somebody else, the government perhaps? Who are they blaming?
Well, it's quite interesting, really. I think that the blame has certainly gone on to the strikes from the corporates that we've lost. We've had to put new clauses into all of our contracts now for rail strikes, which is something that we'd never had before. We're getting asked all of these different things to save them the opportunity. If something like this happens again in January, then we're back to losing more business, more corporate hires. And, we don't just thrive off corporate hires. The footfall this weekend will be massively impacted. We're in such a high footfall area, and it's a big part of our business. So, I think the cost to us is going to be huge this week.
What about suppliers and ancillary events that are going on around your events? People who, selling commemorative gear or selling drinks or whatever. The impact, you've been crystal clear on Amazing Grace, but if a big gig has to go down for all of the reasons that you've clearly described, who else suffers?
The whole industry does. I think it's, if you look around London this week, it honestly has just been insane, the levels of footfall that, office occupancy was, I believe, at 24% of its normal levels this week. So the whole industry is taking hits left, right and centre. That might be that, and that has adverse effects across, the beer industry, the spirits industry, wine, food. All of these different suppliers are also impacted directly because we're their point of sale. So if we can't sell it, they can't make it. And, it's kind of a domino effect right across. So, I think the effects of this are unseen right now, and in the new year we'll start to see these businesses drop off because they won't be able to hang on, unfortunately.
I've asked everybody else about that standout headline on the Times newspaper telling the Prime Minister, get a grip on the situation. You're a business person and you've just told us that you employ a whole range of other folk and other businesses rely upon you. Does this Prime Minister and his government take your industry seriously enough?
I think it's too early to say for this regime, but, you know, we have taken hits for the last 24 months, left, right and centre. You know, hospitality and retail seem to be those two sectors that we can think of that just seem to, once anything like this happens, we're the hardest hit. And we seem to be the last to get any kind of support or financial support from the government. And you know, I would really love to see something in place that is there for us to dip into if we need to.
Interesting, just struck me reflecting on that when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, he certainly took the restaurant and pub part of the entertainment industry very seriously, and they benefited quite a lot from some of the bits and bobs that he did during the lockdown. See whether or not he likes live music and live events as well. Sammy, good of you to break into your weekend to talk to us and share those concerns. We genuinely, all of us, wish you well and hope there is a turn for the better and that Amazing Grace and its partners and friends and colleagues will thrive once again in the new year. For the meantime, thanks again. Lovely to talk to you. That's Semi Ellard-King, who's the Marketing Director of Amazing Grace. I'm said at the very top how pleased I was about having secured my next guest, because joining me is Sarah Guest, who is a nurse at the Dudley Group NHS Foundation Trust. And Sarah has been a nurse for 36 years and has never taken part in strikes before until now. You must feel enormous burden on those shoulders as you sit there reading everything that you do in the papers and hearing everything that you hear on television and radio. It's very difficult circumstance for you to do this after 36 years.
Well, it was very difficult to actually vote in favour of striking. Within Dudley, not enough staff actually voted to meet the threshold for us actually to go on strike. So I haven't actually been on strike, but I very much support all the staff that have been striking.
Yeah, and I remember that distinction when we first met and chatted a couple of months ago, and I'm sorry I didn't make that crystal clear just to remind people of it. We were talking to Dan Poulter on the programme earlier, who's a Tory MP and a hospital doctor, and he was saying... He said that the government should find the money like the Scots did to come up with a decent settlement. And he also said that the Pay Review Board was, in effect, not fit for purpose. Do you sense that? Is there a way through there?
Well, I agreed with a lot of what he said, to be honest. I mean, the Pay Review Board, the supposed independent Pay Review Board, isn't independent at all. All the people on it are appointed by the government, and they're actually paid for by the government. Then the government actually tell them what they can offer us. So, you know, and actually I think most nurses are realistic. They don't expect a 19% pay rise, but something close to inflation, similar to what the Scottish government are offering nurses in Scotland. Most nurses, I think, would accept that.
I was also talking to a former management consultant and now a professor of industrial relations on the programme earlier, and he said the NHS management, new chief executive, the whole team, should look into their souls as well, because in his view they need to manage better and sort this out.
Well, yes, you know, everybody needs to get together and to try and find a way forward to manage things better. I mean, it's not just nurses. I believe, as well as the ambulance staff, recently physiotherapists have also voted to strike in a lot of areas. There's a lot of, you know, the allied health professionals, as well as nurses and midwives, that are facing recruitment and retention crisis that somebody needs to get a grip of, because if it isn't addressed, then patient safety is going to suffer even further than what it already is.
Well, Oliver Dowden, the former chairman of the Conservative Party, says in the Telegraph today, particularly highlighting the ambulance workers' action, people will die. There will be catastrophes. When that happens, will those of your friends and colleagues who are taking industrial action collapse? Is that going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back?
But the issue at the moment, though, is that there are already people dying. There's people, ambulances unable to offload at hospitals so that they can't go out and answer other calls. And people are dying now. This strike isn't, the strikes aren't just about money. It's about addressing recruitment and retention in the NHS. Part of that is money. Because, if you want the workforce there to do the job, then you need to be paying them an appropriate salary to attract them in and keep them working in the NHS.
So in the 30-odd years that you've been doing this job, is this the most worried that you've ever been? It
is. I mean, I feel for junior nurses that are coming into the profession nowadays on the wards, overstretched. There's the number of patients to qualified members of staff, is not safe. And over this last year alone, as I mentioned when I was on before, 20% more nurses left the NHS last year than have previously left the NHS. If people keep leaving at that rate, then things are only going to get worse, on the front line, and the NHS will collapse.
Quite extraordinary point, and even Chris Hopkins, who used to be NHS providers and is now NHS strategy, makes exactly that same point. Great to hear both sides of the argument agreeing on that one. Sarah, thanks for risking coming on again. A real pleasure. It was first time, and it was just now, for your candour and passion there. Lovely to talk to you, and I wish you well. I hope peace comes in our time, because I know you genuinely, like all of the nurses, just want to get on and do the job that you dreamt of doing and worked so hard to do. That's Sarah Guest there, nurse at the Dudley Group NHS Foundation Trust. You've been getting in touch again on our big topic of the day, strikes by public sector workers like Sarah there, but also across the spectrum, not least in transport. Jeff says it's not the government or the strikers who suffer when these mass strikes occur. It is us, the lower paid and the pensioners. I worked for over 50 years in construction, and I relied on these services. I do believe that this is a way of trying to oust the Tories to get Labour in power. Mark says, why shouldn't people go on strike? The government haven't got a clue, with so many MPs claiming for their heating. It seems just so wrong. Do keep your views coming in, and I'd love to share them, whether it's about the nurses, the NHS, whether it's about higher taxes in Scotland, or whether it's about the rail industry and how it's impacted on your plans running up to Christmas. We'll share the best before we go off air at 2 o'clock. That's GBViews at gbnews.uk, or via Facebook and, of course, via Twitter. We have plenty more still to come this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends, including what is the public's mood surrounding those strikes. Our latest GB News People's Poll found an overwhelming majority supporting the strikes. We'll discuss that with a pollster next.
Ahead to this afternoon, and the UK will be cold with a mixture of sunny spells and patchy rain or snow. Here are the details. Eastern Scotland will remain largely dry, but wintry showers will push into northern and western regions. They'll fall as snow over higher ground, and a brisk breeze will develop across the Northern Islands. Northern Ireland will escape most of the showers, but some drizzle is possible under the cloudy skies. A few sunnier spells in the northwest. It'll also be a generally cloudy day across parts of northern England as patchy rain and sleet pushes south, again falling as snow over the Pennines. This band of cloud Rain, sleet and hill snow will extend into northern and central Wales. Meanwhile, further showers will also drift into Pembrokeshire and the southwest, leading to a largely grey afternoon. There'll be an increasing chance of sunnier spells in the Midlands, particularly southeastern parts. Temperatures will be up slightly, but it'll still be a cold day for many at around 5 Celsius. The brightest skies will be across southeast England, where it will also stay dry throughout the afternoon. However, there will be a slight breeze, particularly along Norfolk and Southwark coastlines. Southern England will also have a dry afternoon. Coastal areas here will see some of the highest temperatures of the day, pushing towards 8 or 9 Celsius. Looking into the evening, and showers will remain, whilst temperatures will quickly drop away for those with clear skies. That's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
It's 1:30. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. And in some breaking news, a woman who was critically injured in an incident at the O2 Brixton Academy on Thursday has now died. The Met Police has named her as 33-year-old Rebecca Ikumelo of Newham. Specialist officers are providing support to her family. 2 other women aged 21 and 23 remain in a critical condition. NHS bosses are urging hospitals to free up beds ahead of planned industrial action by ambulance crews in England. They say it's vital the government and unions talk urgently to resolve the pay dispute before the first day of action on the 21st of December. It comes after NHS data showed 1 in 6 patients are now waiting more than an hour to be transferred from ambulances to A&E. The Nurses' Union is warning that the Health Secretary's macho negotiating stance is hindering efforts to resolve their pay dispute. RCN General Secretary Pat Cullen says Steve Barclay undervalues the work of nurses because it's a 90% female profession. She's urging the PM to step in before the dispute engulfs the NHS. More than a quarter of people expect to start the new year in debt. According to research by Tesco Bank, most believe it will take around 21 months to pay back what they owe. Those surveyed say they've borrowed money from family and friends and used overdrafts to cover energy bills and rent. The Met Office has issued yellow weather warnings and is expecting ice for much of Scotland, the north and south west and Wales. It comes as blizzards are set to sweep across the north of the country. Temperatures could temporarily rise tomorrow. However, frost is expected to create difficult road conditions. And the Duke and Duchess of Sussex will be invited to the King's coronation in May next year, according to the Daily Telegraph. That's despite Harry and Meghan making damaging claims levelled at the royal family in their Netflix documentary series. The newspaper says the guest list is yet to be decided, but all family members are welcome. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, you're watching GB News, the People's Channel. Let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Ray, thanks very much indeed. We wanted to find out what you think about the strike, so we've asked about it extensively in our latest GB News People's Poll. We asked people whether they would support the continuing industrial action, and 44% of you said yes, you would, while 29% oppose the strikes and 14% say they neither support nor oppose. When asked who you blame for the strikes, fully 37% blamed the government, while just 28% of the public are blaming the trade unions. Well, joining me now is the man behind the People's Poll. I'm delighted to welcome back Professor Matt Goodwin. There he is, from the University of Kent.
Good afternoon, Alastair.
Great to see you. I was genuinely surprised at the number both supporting the strike and also that the government gets as much of a kicking as the unions do in who's to blame.
Yeah, I mean, look across all of the polls recently, it's a pretty consistent story. We've got higher levels of support for the strike action than we might expect. But as that infographic there showed, there's massive differences by political support. Conservatives are much less likely to support the strikes. Only a small minority, about 20%, do. Labour voters, the vast majority, as you might imagine, support the strikes, about 75 to 80%. So we've got these really big differences that we have to keep in mind. But as you say, when it comes to who voters blame for the strikes, and also, by the way, Alastair, who they blame for inflation and the cost of living crisis, it is the government that is getting more of a kicking than global forces, trade unions, workers, and whatever else. So this is a real problem for Rishi Sunak.
Yeah. And on the broad political canvas, that point that you highlight there, I did as well when I read it to myself, that a very large chunk, I think I've got 77% here of those who support the strikes also support the Labour Party. We've had several tweets saying that this industrial action is all designed, whether it's within the NHS or on the rail network, to cause problems for the government and to help bring in a Labour government. Is there any evidence for that in polling intention or analysis of people's attitudes?
Well, the one thing that we can say is that all of this chaos, all of this disruption is providing a very awkward backdrop for the government, and I suspect helps to explain why in our poll this week we also have the Labour Party still more than 20 points ahead of the Conservatives in the polls. One thing to keep your eye on as well, Alastair, with that in mind, is that the Reform Party is now still hovering at between 7 and 9% in the polls. That's another problem for Rishi Sunak, by the way. And the Labour Party's lead is really there, actually, despite the Labour Party not really doing all that much at all. As the old saying goes, opposition parties don't win elections, governments tend to lose them. And it is this accumulation, this sense of crisis, the small boats in the channel, the strikes, the NHS in freefall. Nobody can get their post at the moment. Yeah. Nobody can get an ambulance. All of this stuff is sort of feeding this perception that actually the government is not doing a particularly competent job. And, you know, the one thing we know from history is when governments aren't seen as being competent, that too is a major predictor of how they perform at the next election.
On the NHS, and I mentioned this earlier on in other interviews, fascinating piece by Juliet Stevenson in the Telegraph today that basically says Labour has had the nerve to say something fundamental needs to be done about the NHS. It's lost its direction. And her sub-headline is to say, why can't everybody agree with that?
Well, amen. Whoever is the first person out of the block with the NHS reform debate is going to win that debate. The blunt reality is that everybody loves the NHS, but everybody knows the NHS is not working. And going into that next election, I think public service reform, something actually we haven't really debated as a country since the era of Tony Blair and New Labour. They were the last government really to get their arms around that debate do with reform, rightly or wrongly. That was the discussion we had at the time. But now again, Labour outflanking the Conservatives. And not only on this, Alastair, actually, I think, you know, if you look at where Keir Starmer is positioning himself on Brexit, even to some extent on migration, voters will, I think, understandably be suspicious of some of that positioning. But what it shows is a willingness within the Labour leadership office to actually go toe-to-toe with the Conservatives on these issues that are now dominating the agenda. They're going to have to push back against that. Otherwise, there is no path to victory at the next election.
Yeah. Your poll also discovers intriguingly little love for Rishi Sunak's strike reforms.
Well, this is a bit of a challenge for Sunak. He's going to make it, or bring legislation that will make it harder for for workers to strike. We don't find much support for that at all. This is really a sort of 20-30% position. This isn't something that is cutting through in a major way. I'll tell you something though, Alice. I'll tell you what's cutting through right now. It's this kind of sense that people want the government to get a grip of all of these big issues that are at the top of the agenda. And I was struck, you know, I've been looking at the Conservative Party campaigning material going into this election, and one of the lines that you're seeing now is the Labour nightmare before Christmas, essentially sort of blaming Labour for the strikes and the action. My personal view as a pollster is that messaging is completely wrong. What the Conservatives need to do is get back to this key point about delivery, right? Voters want stuff to work. And so I think Sunak needs to really position himself as the guy that's doing, you know, the tough stuff. He's in the weeds, he's in the detail, you know, his actions, give him 6 months, see where we are in the spring, see if the small boat numbers are coming down, see if the NHS waiting lists are coming down, see if inflation's coming down, interest rates are coming down. And that allows him in the summer to then come out and say, look, we've turned a corner, things are getting better. Don't let anybody else ruin it. Stick with me. You know, I'm not flashy, but I'm the guy that gets things done. That, I imagine, is what Team Sunak are hoping for. That's the kind of narrative. Whether he can pull it off, Alastair, is another thing altogether.
Great to see you, Matt. Thank you for breaking into your weekend to talk to us and for all the work you do on the polls. Thank you very much indeed. Professor Matthew Goodwin there, Kent University, with his reflections upon the GB News People's Poll. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio, with plenty more still to come this afternoon, including Christmas is a time for giving, of course, and I'll be talking to Carolyn Harris, MP, about the Everyone Deserves a Christmas campaign.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV, radio and online. Time now for Saturday Savings. As postal and rail strikes hit the nation, scammers have come out of the woodwork to make the most of the disruption. Delivery scams in particular have been on the rise. So here to tell us more is tech journalist and good friend of the programme, Will Guyot. And there he is with his... some cards got through to you. A lot of people have been saying to me, it seems a bit thin on the ground these days and what have you. It seems almost obscene, but fraudsters really do embrace Christmas as being an open goal and a golden opportunity. How can we best protect ourselves, Will?
Well, you're absolutely right, Alastair. And what happens at this time of year, they're actually playing on you being busy. They're playing on you focusing on tons of different things. They're playing on the expectation that you might be waiting for parcels or items to come through the post. The one lens I try to apply to this, there's some technical things we can talk about, but it's just about thinking, would this organisation really be sending me this? Have I purchased something from this organisation? Be very, very savvy when you go into these situations. And I know it's it's easy for somebody like me to say that that's done this for many years. But look for a number of different things. If, for example, you're being sent an email and it says click this link to go and pay the bill or something like that, if you click on the link, make sure it's the actual name of the company. So if it's claiming to be Royal Mail, the web address would start royalmail.com. For example, if it's Amazon, it would start amazon.com. And what normally happens in these scam situations is you'll get a long web address which has nothing to do with the company that you've purchased from. Also, another good example there is when they send you an email. Check for common mistakes in email. Once again, easy for somebody like me to say that as an English graduate. But in one of the great examples I had a couple of years ago now, Alastair, I was about to go on air with a radio station and I got an email into my email box which looked like it came from my bank. I was about to click on it and share my details until I realised it started with "Hello, dear." Now, I don't think my bank in a million years would ever use a phrase like that. So just have a bit of I know the temptation is to rush through these things, and I understand everybody does because we're all busy people. But when you receive a message, just stop for a second and pause. It's not just shops and online retailers and scammers who are trying to get money via, let's say, for example, pretending they're a courier that you owe money to. There's other situations that are really quite large this Christmas. There's a text message which is going around lots of people, which is suggesting it is a member of the family sending a text from a friend's phone because they've lost their phone and they urgently need some money in order to do something. Lots of people have been falling foul of that particular scam. My advice there would be to call the number, to try and speak to your member of your family, etc. Don't just hand over money without having any contact with somebody, because these kind of scams exist to get, even if they get 10, 20 people out of several thousand, that's a worthy return for them. And the money almost always disappears. It almost always disappears in an untraceable fashion. And that's the challenge with some of these scams that we see.
And no right of reply, and not like on a credit card where some of the credit card companies are utterly brilliant in protecting you if you have been scammed or if you have been somebody's nicked your number or heard your number somewhere.
Yeah, you're quite right. But what's also happening, Alastair, and I think in the next couple of years, we're going to find ourselves in a position where even the credit card companies, because this kind of scamming is now so prevalent, they're going to say, did you take all the steps, reasonable steps to keep yourself safe? Saying, oh, it arrived in my email box, so I clicked on it, is no longer going to be a defense in those scenarios. So if you're really concerned about it and you're not sure yourself, maybe if there's somebody who's more technically savvy in your life, a member of your a family, a member or a friend or a neighbour, maybe have a chat with them about something like this. But the harsh reality is we're going to see more and more of this activity, and it's actually going to become harder to find and understand, harder to find and identify. That's one of the inevitabilities, that crime is disappearing from the streets, as it were. It's easier now for somebody to nobody will go and rob a bank in 2022. They will do something via cyber means or via scam means because they can just disappear so quickly.
Sure. While you were just giving that last very useful answer, we had pictures up on the screen for those who are listening to our conversation on radio of a big old-fashioned telephone and a lovely smart laptop. Which, in your knowledge, whatever the data tells you and colleagues, is now the most likely source of a scam? It used to be cold calling, seemed to be, and I suppose a fake email is a form of cold calling.
Yeah, it's cold calling is getting rarer and rarer these days. It does still happen. It exists. My parents the other day took a call from an organisation claiming they were on behalf of their broadband company, and their broadband was about to grind to a halt unless they gave them something like £50. But thankfully, I took that call and had great fun and pleasure with spinning the scammer a line for I kept them on the line for at least 45 minutes, which I was quite proud of. And they didn't get any money out of my parents, thankfully. But yeah, we're seeing more and more examples, I guess, of it's more of the text scamming, so scams through text and also through email, Alastair. We're definitely seeing a lot more of those this Christmas.
Sound advice as ever, and a joy to talk to you again. Thanks for finding time for us. That's Will Guyatt, who's a brilliant tech journalist on all of those matters, but also some really deep and profound, sensible advice on those dodgy emails and messages that do sadly come up on your phone and occasionally on your laptop as well. So heed good advice when it's offered to you. Now, as we said a little earlier, Christmas, of course, is a time for giving, not least to those who really need it most. Over the last few weeks, we've been talking to charities and initiatives helping those in need this festive season. Delighted to be joined now by a good friend to this programme about her work with a charity called Everyone Deserves Christmas, and it is Caroline Harris MP, who's also the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party in Wales. So why don't you just do that? Tell me about this charity, an umbrella organisation that has no limit to its ambition in terms of those it helps.
Yeah, well, we started off when we found out that kids weren't getting fed in the summer. That was 7 years ago, and me and my team made sandwiches and delivered them out. And that Christmas, we thought, well, if people are using food banks in the summer, they're not going to have much for Christmas. So we did 100 hampers from my living room the first year, and we delivered them out to families in need. And I've just taken delivery today, Alastair, of the start of what will be in the hamper for around about 2,000 families. So it's grown beyond all expectation, unfortunately, because the need is there. What we find in this year is we're having to pay a lot more for food this year. But doesn't matter, we will get the money, we'll make sure that everyone gets a Christmas.
Brilliant, absolutely superb work. And I'm guessing that you chose this one particularly, as you've just said, because colleagues like it as well. But you lot must get absolutely inundated at Christmas time saying, come on, you're an MP, Deputy Leader of the party, come on board and help us. How do you decide which one you will help out with?
Well, I started this one, Alastair, so this is where my passion is. This is something that I started with my team. So this literally takes up my summer, my Easter and my Christmas. But there are so many good charities out there that, you know, we need to help, we need to support. And I think Christmas is such a special time that I just hate to think of kids not having a box of crackers and chocolates at Christmas. So that's what this is all about, sharing a bit of love.
We did a piece with Sophie Breber earlier on, our reporter, about food banks, and I said in the introduction something I feel terribly strongly about, and that is that some people say the number and range of food banks that we have in the country now, something that neither you nor I grew up with, it's a relatively newish thing, although there are other great charities helping out, that it's an indictment of this great country of ours and indeed your great country. And I said, no, quite the opposite. You know, when you look at the patrons, the supporters, the volunteers, it's actually a hurrah for Wales and the United Kingdom more generally of the number of people who will chip in and help out those who are less fortunate themselves.
Yeah. And no, I mean, my gran used to say nobody knows what's around the corner for them. And that's very true, because people who this year will be receiving hampers or are going to food banks last year were donating. You know, things turn around so quickly, especially in this economic climate. So if you can give to a food bank, or if you can help somebody this Christmas to make sure that they get a bit of festive joy, then, you know, please do it, because it makes you feel good apart from anything else. But it's wonderful to see so many smiley faces.
I don't want to be cliched, Caroline, but I guess that that fundraising Christmas carol services are a big deal in Wales as well.
Yeah, they are. I mean, I've been to plenty of them, but I do love them. I cry every time I go to one, but I absolutely love them.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, I hope you've many more to enjoy, and that Christmas, however it unfolds for you and your family, is a great success. It is genuinely always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for all that you're doing and sharing the detail of it with us there. Caroline Harris there, Labour Member of Parliament and Deputy Leader of the Welsh Labour Party. Now, you have been in touch with us overnight and throughout the day. We've got time just for one more, but thank you very much indeed to all of you who sent those messages in. Graham says, how about pay rises for rail workers once the United Kingdom Railways are not subsidised by the taxpayer? On that thought, I'm afraid we are done for today, but we'll be back at noon, same place tomorrow. Hope very much indeed that